Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar hosted by the IPA webinar team. In view of the next IPA Congress on the infantile and its multiple dimensions to be held online due to the pandemic in July 2021, the IPA team wishes to invite members to renew their links and exchange through a series of introductory webinars on the theme of the Congress. Today, our webinar, The Infantile in Our Times, is, as usual, divided in two parts. In the first hour of the webinar, we have the privilege of listening to our guests coming from the three IPA regions. Christine Anzieux-Premerer from North America, USA, Massimo Vigna Taglianti from Europe, Italy, and Clara Nemas Urman from Latin America, Argentina. In the second part of the session, we will open a discussion with you, participants. You will be able to send your comments and ask questions throughout the webinar. To do this, please post your question in the question pane of the panel control on the right-hand side of your screen. You must click on the small white arrow, which is located just before the word questions. A chat window will open where you can write your question using your keyboard and send it. Our guest will attempt to answer as many questions as possible. The infantile is a complex but crucial concept. Freud was the first to examine the importance of the infantile in the formation of the psyche and of its repercussions on the formation and evolution of each person's psyche. He centered it together with sexuality, drives, and desire in the core of psychic functioning. He was joined long ago by child psychoanalyst Melanie Klein-Winnicott, but also by adult analyst Bion Green, in a manner that we can say that in psychoanalysis in our days, infantile's multiple registers, manifestations, and phases were deeply explored. Therefore, inside psychoanalytical communities, some aspects of the infantile are privileged more than others. Indeed, the infantile is not only the pre-Oedipal, insofar as the latter is the retroactive reading of the infantile from the Oedipus point of view, but it is also the non-pre-Oedipal infantile who escapes suppression. Insofar as the infantile is not observable or can only be apprehended in reconstruction and après coup, we arrive sometimes in assimilating the infantile and the primary, the infantile and the child itself, and its multiple expressions and resources, imaginative, affective, and relating. But the infantile, by definition, maybe it is meant to be what escapes from words and definitions, what escapes from repression and dressage, what protests and never surrenders, what we can meet in the psychoanalytic session as no today concept, a past that it can only be considered in the future, a secondary conception of the primary. Defining it may be an illusion, but a necessary illusion we never renounce to. Must a name mean something? Of course it must. Humpty Dumpty says in Lewis Carroll's novel, Through the Looking Glass, my name means the shape I am. With a name like yours, Alice, you might be any shape or almost any. Today, we invited three distinguished analysts from each IPA region to give us a sketch of the shape has taken the infantile in the psychoanalytic communities in our days. Before giving them the floor, allow me please to present them to you briefly. Christine Anzieux-Premerer is an adult and child psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, member of the Société Psychanalytique de Paris, and at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. She is faculty of the Columbia University Psychoanalytic Center, where she directs the parent-infant training program. She published The Process of Representation in Early Childhood, attacks on linking in parent of young disturbed children, a psychoanalytic exploration of the body in today's psychoanalysis, in French, on play in child psychotherapy, on psychoanalytic intervention with parents and babies. Massimo Vigna Taglianti is a medicine and clinical neuropsychiatrist. He is full member of Italian Psychoanalytic Society and International Psychoanalytic Association, training and supervising analyst, expert in analysis of children and adolescents, and scientific chair of Italian Psychoanalytic Society. He is also adjunct professor of child and adult psychiatry in Aosta University. He is particularly interested in the clinical work and in his writing in transference, countertransference dynamics, and above all in role reversal phenomena, as well in meaning of action and plane in psychoanalysis. Clara Nema Urman is a training and supervising analyst of the Buenos Aires Psychoanalytic Association, child and adolescent psychoanalyst, member of FEPAL, and member of the IPA China Committee, of the Asia Pacific Planning Committee, and chair for Latin America for the 52nd IPA Congress, the Infantile, in its multiple dimensions. She maintains a full-time private practice in Buenos Aires and was vice president and scientific secretary of her society. She had published numerous papers on ethics, psychoanalytic theory, and clinical technique in working with adolescent patients. She is currently involved in continuous education in seminars on Kleinian development and teaching of Melzer's ideas, and she runs a group of young colleagues on the project of becoming an analyst. She is also involved in the Latin America Working Party on comparative clinical methods. Christine, please.
Thank you. Thank you. So hello, everybody. It's a pleasure today to talk with Clara and Massimo, and very soon to all of you. Our infantile wish to be omnipotent, overcoming time and space, is actualized today by the online system, erasing hopefully our COVID background anxiety. So let's enjoy being together. The word infantile seems to me quite beautiful, better than archaic, primitive, or primordial. It associates, for me at least, a representation of something fluid, rooted in the origins of the psyche and fueled with the energy of the libido. We can use it today as a playful space to think together. Since infants means the one who doesn't speak, I will refer to the first months of life before toddlers start using forms of language, signaling that the ego and symbolization are achieved. But infantile is not so much origin of development. The infantile is unconscious, still inscribed in our skin, in the body balance, of course in our sexuality, and mostly in our dreams. We know about early and deep psychic states only in the afterwards, the après-coup of transformations and processes. But infantile is still actual on our libidinal choices or rejections. It has been the foundation of our development, and on the other side, the maturation of the psychic functioning has developed against that archaic primitive structure, making that made pleasure principle as a dictator that is not anymore, hopefully. This is a state into which the drives, the object, the primitive ego share fundamental mechanisms that organize the psyche. At first, this is shaping a primitive superego and the ego ideal, or I would say mostly ideal ego. We will talk about that later. I propose that the infantile moves along two levels: primary narcissism, so vulnerable, and the power of eros. Narcissism. Human babies are born premature, helpless, fully dependent upon a caring environment. They experience primitive agonies, disorganized anxieties, protecting themselves by projection, splitting, dissociation. They also meet with a maternal figure who gives satisfaction to their need, stimulates the drives, offer a mirror that will create a sense of self. Imitation, introjection, maintains the integration of the self. We know from Melanie Klein how archaic anxieties and primitive fantasies are centered on the breast. For Winnicott, the psychoanalyst is used in the transference in repeating the defect of early environment. When he feels a total powerlessness in front of the narcissistic vengeance of the patient's infantile that had been broken in his growth. The environment is fused for the infant into the emerging self in the formation of the primary narcissism, the first holding for the psyche. We know how narcissistic patients are wounded and use primitive defenses when they didn't get or integrate this essential foundation. Drives and body. The notion of the embodied self comes from Freud, concluding remark in The Ego and the Id. The ego is at first and foremost a bodily ego. Freud thought that internal perception were primordial roots of the ego. Damasio has suggested that the core of the self might be found in a primordial feelings as a continuous background of body sensations that cannot be separated from affects. Affects are here at the center, I think. The body ego gives shape to the ego through skin sensations, wrappings, envelopes, mouth and anal sensation, with a discharge of frustration and pain into a receptive object. In Freud's project for a scientific psychology, the mother acts as a protective shield against stimuli, essential at maintaining the internal balance in the child's early psychic functioning, as it is as stimulating pleasure and desire. There is a mutual inclusion of bodies of mother and child. An infant, until its mother's care, receives both stimulation and communication, and thus the establishment of a body ego responds to the need for a narcissistic envelope. We can understand how, for example, respiratory issues or skin disorder can have a link with the way primitive affects have been received and transformed by the maternal object. Autoerotic capacity in an intermediate space that gives room for all creativity, that makes us feeling ourselves. On the opposite, compulsive behavior for self-soothing can lead to fetishistic and addictive behaviors. The infantile is at the origin of the drives. This is a source of the complex system of combination of forces that Freud described in the metapsychology, the process of regulations and of quantities and qualities of experiences. Infantile sexuality starts from there as a psychosomatic organization. The concept of drives is a Freudian discovery of a constant push, never exhausted by satisfaction. Affects start in the infantile as raw feelings of possessive love and hatred. Look at the 4-year-old girl's drawing that I hope you see on your screen, in a powerful transference towards me as an omnipotent figure with phallic attributes, very evocative of paleontological Venuses, a prehistoric Venus. A few years later, entering latency, she would draw a very calm gendered character and couldn't remember or even recognize that drawing. That was weird to her. But for me, it's still there. You see the breast, the penis, the belly and the baby in the mind of the mother, traces of the infantile in adulthood. It is in love and its intensity that our infantile, it's Valentine's Day today, okay? That our infantile roots make us wanting to be reunited with a similar object. The infantile is also in our capacity for dreaming, so important for continuously associating present and past, elaborating trauma, giving strength to the richness of the associative process. Also, as you know, pregnancy, parenthood is a phase of internal changes in adults that reactivate infantile sensation as experiences. Postpartum issues are a good example of this kind of regression. It seems also that infantile sensoriality and bisexuality are transformed during adolescence. After puberty, pleasures are not the same. I would say we will talk about that later, but adolescence, this is the end of the infantile. The psychoanalyst experience infantile identification with the patient, and some are part of the counter-transference and gives precious information, but some are blind spots. In parent-infant psychotherapy, psychoanalytic therapy, or with children with developmental disorders, the lack of balance in the body, some sensorial reaction in the analyst are part of the revival of infantile experience of lack of holding and containment. Practicing child psychoanalysis is, it seems to me, a good way to know about our own infantile. The seduction by the infantile omnipotence of the analysant is sometimes a blind spot that works as a narcissistic defense that put at risk the analytic pair. There is a narcissistic jouissance, you know, in the identification with the other's infantile. So to finish, what remains of the infantile? Sensory traces, representation reworked by the effect of the après-coup, imaginary construction based on parental imagos of early childhood, residues of identification with the mother of this bygone area, the one whose function had been introjected, whose avatar as source of ideals. There is still a present infantile. It's under our skin. You feel it now, hopefully more erotic than painful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for this wonderful presentation, which highlights the infantile rooted in the body, inscribed in our skin, you said. I think you present it rather as a psychic movement or as the psychic in movement, which is very interesting as figure, as a shape. We'll come back during the discussion. Massimo, please.
Thank you, Eliana. Thank you all, and thank you the IPA webinar team for organizing the webinar. And thank you very much for the possibility to share our ideas. So, the infantile today, to which child are we referring when we speak of infantile today? The child inferred by Freud at the beginning of the 1900s from the functioning of his neurotica, then he can be identified with a bashful mind dominated by fantasies and Oedipal anxieties of a 3 to 5 year old child, or a much younger one, the 6 to 12 month old infant whose primitive functioning is characterized by splitting and projections, like Melanie Klein illustrated. Today, the recent multidisciplinary findings feed us back with the reality of a baby who is innately equipped with a proto-mental and intersubjective prerequisites that make her apt for creating and maintaining interpersonal connection fraught with affective meaning. In my opinion, today, we should keep together in our minds during clinical practice all these children. Moreover, I personally view the infantile as a dimension that cannot be thought separately from the other, order, to which the child is innately tuned from the very first instant of life. To paraphrase Winnicott, there cannot be an infantile, there can only be a maternal infantile. As Fonagy observed, psychoanalysis is based fully on children. When we daily face, together with our patients, omnipotent idealized expectation and unsettling preconscious fantasies, we can reasonably take it for granted that infantile ways of thinking are at play in the relation. In this respect, the psychoanalytic community agrees that psychic pain is explicable as a residue of infantile experience, and that development, particularly in its early stages, shapes intrapsychic and interpersonal relation modes that are characteristics of adulthood also. By the way, Freud himself, in his project for psychology, said that the unconscious is the infantile mental life, a spatial realm with its desire, ways of expression, and peculiar mechanisms not at work elsewhere. A developmental perspective, thus, has been the focus of psychoanalysis from the beginning, as Freud conceptualized psychopathology as a recapitulation of previous modes of functioning, which the person regresses to and/or is stuck in. If we observe the theoretical models that have been advanced to describe the unconscious system and its connection with the infantile mental functioning, we cannot but notice that they got organized along some specific lines of development. The first of these lines of development is correlated to an increasing importance given to the presence and/or absence of the object, and to some indispensable qualities of this presence as crucial factors in the construction of the mind. Essentially, in the 50s and 60s, the watershed in psychoanalysis was not due so much to the paradigm shift in not viewing any longer the infant as only being driven but drive satisfaction and aiming at attention decrease. Rather, it was characterized by an emphasis on the infant's inborn tendency to establish and maintain relationships. At that time, Feyerabend had already said that children are not only driven by their instinct, but also by a quest for the object. However, an actual shift in perspective was the intuition that the development of the individual unfolds not so much through internal maturational processes, but through interpersonal processes, in that the growth and the formation of psychic functions depend on the kind and the quality of intersubjective encounter. Another line of development, in my view, gives greater importance to the internalization phenomena of early relational experiences and their strong emotional connotation as key elements for the creation of basic mental structures. Ferenczi anticipated in his entire work the concept of internalization of object relation as active elements at the foundation of the unconscious mental functionings of the individual. Later, Heinz Hartmann theorized that development basically consists in some kind of differentiation process, and that the transformation of the process of external regulation into internal processes is the core of internalization processes. In this sense, Margaret Mahler formulated the hypothesis of a gradual consolidation of a structural psychic system implied in affective self-regulation. It appears in children aged approximately 1.5 when they have a vocabulary of some 15 words only. All these led to confirm that interacting modes which are established between the child and the caregiver in the child's environment are mediated by affective transactions based on non-verbal dynamics. We have seen the progressing development of what have been called the models of object relation, with variation within them, with a gradual shift from the centrality of the ego functions to an increasing emphasis on the dynamic operation carried out by the core of the self, which is not only unconscious, but is also non-verbal, based on the body and implied in the patterns of affect regulation. The object relation theories emphasize the achievements in early life and the structures of mental functions, starting with the representational processing of whatever comes from the context of primary sensomotor experiences which occur in the mother-child matrix, or, in Winnicott's words, in the holding environment. This representation evolved to more and more symbolic and differentiated level of the self in its relation to the object, however keeping the general assumption that the previous level of the interaction representation are stored and permanently recorded in the mind and continue to carry a crucial weight in the individual psychic life. This is one of the reasons that make it easier now to understand why the unconscious functioning of the infants persists both in the older child and the adult, and is expressed and unveiled, at times in elusive forms, at the other times in evidence forms, in the transference-countertransference dynamic. Besides, Freud claimed that each person has in her unconscious a tool to interpret the unconscious of the others is quite compatible with the finding that the non-verbal expressive flow binding the child to parent throughout life continues to be a primary mean to exchange relational affective communication that people perceive intuitively. Ever since Freud, we know that psychoanalytic therapy has to do with managing and transforming affects. In fact, what used to be in the foreground was the acquisition of knowledge at an almost exclusively verbal and conscious level. Now, we place greater value on a specific treatment of affects, both conscious and unconscious, because we know that the child's non-verbal affective system continues to function throughout life. And in this respect, for a long time, psychoanalysis has overrated the mode of verbal and symbolic representation and has underrated the non-verbal pre-symbolic modes, granting a privileged position to language as if it were the only reliable source of information about the inner experience of the other. Today, and in conclusion, on the other hand, we know that the transference reactualization of implicit memories during the analytic treatment is increasingly an indispensable condition to enable the patient to have a transformative interpersonal experience, so that she will be able to build, I quote Fred Bush, a psychoanalytic mind that can finally experience psychically what has not been experienced as such thus far. If what cannot be remembered is enacted, like Freud suggested when he introduced the concept of Agieren, only apparently where there is action, there isn't any representation, and more precisely, where there cannot be any figurability, we will find enactment sequences that anticipate the symbolic and represent the only possible way of giving voice to unrepressed, yet still mute and wordless, intrapsychic infantile dimension. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you for this so elaborated presentation centered on the affective part of the infantile as an internalized affective mental functioning in its relation to the primordial or other, while insisting on the importance of having an integrative model in mind when we approach an entity as complex as the infantile, a whole that cannot be divided into sections and so know to be sexed. Clara, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I am also honored and very happy to be able to to exchange ideas with Massimo and Christine. I only had the chance to meet them really a very few days ago. We haven't met before. So, but it is really a very interesting theme. And I think that for some reason, or for one reason, the IPA has invited us to reflect on the infantile as a much needed at the moment discussion, because we have seen all the people that are involved in these 2 last years regarding or expecting the infantile in its multiple dimensions, our Congress. When I received the invitation to participate in the webinar, I was interested in the addition you made of in our times, the infantile in our times. And I started thinking about it. I don't know if it happens to you, but it happens to me that when I start thinking about something, I start finding examples of it everywhere around. So on one of those days, I had the opportunity to observe a lively young girl of 6 who was baking a cake with her grandmother. When she started to taste the cake, she put down the fork and said in a whisper, "It tasted better in my head." It seems that the cake was underdone, and following the suggestion of a resourceful mother, the cake went back to the oven, and the result was much better, ending with a happy girl enthusiastically eating her cake. A few days later, a patient was talking in the session about her disappointment at the romantic moment she expected to spend with her partner by the sea, bottle of wine included, everything was. In her fantasy, they were going to talk about very intimate things that she had also planned to ask him. Instead, the conversation derived around their children and domestic problems. The patient felt frustrated and angry at her partner, but she did not follow that line in the session. As she usually did, she started talking about her own demanding ways. She was always the perfectionist, but this was the way she always describes herself. It's repetitive. So I told her that she seemed to have an illusion that did not go the way she expected. To my surprise, not only she agreed, but added that she thought that for her to have an illusion was too infantile and not permissible. Instead, to have a demand or being a perfectionist was more acceptable and sounded more mature or more adult. Let's keep these 2 vignettes in mind. And as Massimo reminded us just now, the psychoanalysis would not exist without the infantile, since it's very, very beginning. But it took to 1997, it was, until Florence Guignard coined the concept, the psychoanalytic concept of the infantile. I think it's very interesting. She says that she wouldn't change her definition when she reads it now, and I agree with her. But then I think that we need to see that the infantile comes into very different versions in psychoanalysis. It can be as a substantive, an adjective, a way to describe a personality or a behavior. From a developmental point of view, the baby, the child, the infant, everything. But I would like to convey another thing. I would like to convey an image of the infantile as an arrow or arrows that traverse all mental states at every moment of our lives. In a way, it's a way of functioning, giving meaning and understanding the world through a complex perspective originated in the fact that as human beings, we are so dependent on our objects and at the same time we are alone. This is something I would like to stress, because I think that from this state of mind of helplessness emerges the capacity to fantasize, imagine, create, hope and dream, together with the need we feel to feel omnipotent and omniscient. And even if we may omnipotently deny it in being adults, no, there are times, as the one we are going through now, that makes us realize that the state of helplessness and vulnerability stays with us throughout our entire life. One of the characteristics of the infantile, which I would like to consider, because as also Florence Guignard says, this is one of the features that persists all over or throughout our life, is the narcissistic omnipotence of what Freud called His Majesty the baby, which needs to be relinquished, at least partially, in accordance with the reality principle. But of course, in a more normal and adjusted adult, this majesty does not show itself in the regalia of royalty. No, it dresses up itself in different clothes depending on the possibilities accorded by the environment and by the society. For instance, being demanding and being the perfectionist. No, for other people or at other moments of our life, this omnipotent fantasy or narcissistic perspective becomes a way of being in the world, a Weltanschauung. We may discuss this later. Mourning omnipotent fantasies, even if only partially, may pave, as I said, the way to the development of imagination. I would like to quote Hannah Siegel, because I think that she described this beautifully in her paper, Imagination, Play and Art, in which she explores the development from omnipotent unconscious fantasies towards symbolization. And she speaks about the as-if world of fantasy differentiated with the what-if world of imagination, a world that is a mixture of illusion and a necessary consideration for reality. Illusion differs in this sense from hallucination, like the first hallucination of the breast, or delusion, because of the consideration of time, time as a factor of reality. No? So illusion includes hope and trust that something wished for might happen in time. Hallucination and delusions are convictions, are happening. No, it's not something in the future. But what interests me at this moment, at least, is this passage from the as-if to the what-if in an analysis, you see? Because I think that we could also consider not only a way or a path during our lives, but our way of conceiving analysis as well. I'm going to try and give a very short example of a supervision. The supervision, the supervisee brought the analysis, the patient, the clinical material of a child who had been with her in analysis for a long time. She had made progresses in many ways, but there was one thing that never changed, was that she kept this patient, the thumb inside her mouth, in such a way that she had a malformation of the palate, you see. She wouldn't take the thumb out. She was almost 11 years old. When we looked at it in the session, I started thinking that we had to play with this idea of talking to the finger in the mouth as if it were another character in the session. How was the finger feeling inside the mouth? And moreover, how did it think it would feel if it stepped outside? Was it frightened to abandon its refuge? Was it curious about what went on outside? Would it be able to get back inside if he was too frightened or did not like it outside? So all of a sudden, these questions started, you know, coming up, and we thought about this as the personification of an unborn part, baby of the personality, which was stubbornly but also omnipotently kept in place. You see? Well, I'm not going further because we have no much time, but I wanted to bring that into mind, no? The way we work, or the way in which, having in mind the infantile, we have also an idea of the psychoanalytic process. Not because the infantile has to, you know, disappear, but that because we have to work with it. Freud, to go back to Freud, distinguished two types of illusions: those that are not harmful, since the illusion is obvious, and those that are dangerous, because they take the place of an objective apprehension of reality, for him at the time associated with philosophy, ideology, and especially religion. So here we go back to my beginning, the beginning of my presentation, taking into account the title, which includes "In Our Times." What happens in our times? The development of technology, which, as Christine said, allows us to meet in these webinars, which is fantastic now, is on one side the possibility of communication and contact, but it also becomes a site of abolishment of time, space, and corporeal limits. Would these areas be places in which the omnipotent fantasy may take place, carrying with it a deficit of symbolization? But what about the need to keep in mind an illusion which allows for the contact with an idealized object? Because the progression of the idealized object has not been very much taken into account, no? Without losing contact with the limitations and possibilities that reality imposes. What is the place of illusion in our times? Moreover, what is real? What still surprises us? The rise of new technologies has changed not only the way we look at the future and transmit our stories and cultures, but how we can conceive reality and also the future, as Freud says in his introductory sentence in The Future of an Illusion, no? Including what concrete possibilities we have to change what up to now was real or natural, and make become true what could be considered fantasies or even delusions from other perspectives and at other times. Some paradigms present in contemporary culture are even opposed to the psychoanalytic ethos. One is the imperative not to suffer, which is confused with not tolerating mental pain either. And the other is the exaltation of voluntarism, because despite the enormous influence and intellectual acceptance of the concept of the unconscious in our culture, the slogan that defines voluntarism, if there is a will, there is a way, is there. And for me, it has been transformed almost in a command from the superego. No? So illusion and frustration and acceptance of limits is something that we could also perhaps discuss or think about later. Freud wrote The Future of an Illusion very close in time and very related to civilization and its discontent. Are we facing a new future of an illusion in new kinds of discontent in our civilization? Psychoanalysis has shown that the place of the infantile lies at the core of our affections in relation to the human community and future generations. all over the world, analysts have been gathering, reflecting, and producing ideas about the infantile during these last 2 years. Thanks also to the invitation of the IPA. No? More than ever in this pandemic, I think, climate change and extreme ideologies that we are, facing in our world today, the place of the infantile in our lives, with all its vitality, needs to be addressed and reflected upon as we are doing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clara, for bringing us this mixture of illusion, omnipotent fantasies, and necessary consideration for reality regarding not only the infantile in psychoanalytic process, but in our days, also the virtual communications and the issue and risk of a potential deficit of symbolization. Now, coming back to your presentations, we have 15 more minutes. You would like perhaps to discuss some points before coming to the answering questions with our participants?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Who wants to start? Christine, Massimo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Christine.
Okay.
Yes. If
I
you
have
don't
not questions, but more observation and affinity with the papers of Clara and Christine. In the paper of Christine, I am struck by three things. But the statement that the infantile and is inconscious, but also the inconscious is the infantile. I think that is one line that is present in all our presentation. So one point that is, in my opinion, very important in the paper of Christine is the issue that imitation and introjection maintain the integration of the self. In the line of my paper, that the role of the internalization of the regulation in the relation process with the other, with the mother, is indispensable to construct the basic structure of the mind in order to have a capability to think. In the relation, in the paper of Clara, two things very important. One is the problem of the virtual reality and how much this kind of technologies could not improve,
have an influence or
enhance the omnipotence of the individuals. Another point, another issue very interesting is the passage between illusion and reality. I think that here is important, is indispensable the theorization from Winnicott about the problem of the founded created object.
Thank you, Massimo. Okay. Christine,
okay. Yeah. I want to thank you, both of you, because I will try to be short, which is difficult. Let's say I have one question to Massimo, just to entertain the discussion, because it's a question of causality. When we think about the infantile and then we put it in the child, of course, it's obvious, but it's not obvious from a Freudian point of view, So the question that if we think in terms of causality, because we have two levels of thinking. One is it had happened because at the origins, you know, the mother wasn't looking at you so well, you know, that people label now blaming the mother, which means sometimes it's very difficult to talk about, you know, early time. And also a way to think from the adult, that the adult who is regressing is not going back to the infantile. The adult faces a kind of breakdown in the adult's functions. And it's about obstructive or destructive processes in the adult that are linked certainly to, I would say, what has not been well structured in the past, but it's about interfering with the growth in the adult. So we are in this kind of back and forth, you know, and causality is always a very important question. About Clara, we share the same illusion. It's right now to share illusion. No, I think it's very interesting to differentiate the hallucination of the satisfaction, like you did, and delusion, which is what we mean believe. This is true, you know. So then I get satisfaction. At least I can sleep without screaming for my mother or for the other giving me presence. Or I can be in delusion. And here in the US, we have been, you know, in a society where delusion is part of the group dynamic. And I think we could add about the infantile as something that Freud also that makes people identify to each other in this kind of regressive primary narcissism function that glued people together and abolished thinking. But I wanted to go back to your clinical example. I would say the birth of the finger, you know, and then a part of the self start to exist, but has to be allowed not to be still in the placenta or the mental placenta of the mother. I think it's just a beautiful, now it's a metaphor, but for the girl that was concrete, you know. So this is exactly about that, the infantile. So how can we be born for once fully? And it's and the metaphor you offer us of the arrow, you know, that traverses, you know, the mental states. It's beautiful because for me, I associate with the energy, the intensity, you know, of infancy. But that intensity, it's about the libido. It's about the forces that could be destructive, that could lead to dissociation, but that could lead. So today, sorry to be back to that. In the US, it's an important day. You know, the cupids are raw. You know, creating love and erotic desire. So, sorry, but I follow your metaphor. So this is. So if I have one question. This is about the role that we have now, we observe now, you know, I would say, in my view, ideal ego or this kind of group dynamic about believing together in order to deny or much more that to disavow the reality that we are dealing with, which is to be threatened to die.
Yes. And I think it's so interesting, and we would need more time. But for me, I began associating images, perhaps. No, one of the things is causality. I don't know how to pronounce it, but cause and effect. No, and I think that in a way misses the point of the complexity of the construction of the mind. In my way of imagining it, you see that I have many like visual images, no? And my way of imagining it is the wet sand in the beach, you see? The wet sand, you have the sand which is dry, and you have the ocean. And they mix, no, at different times of the day. And when the wave goes back to the ocean, you find all these little holes, you know, in the beach that children start excavating and trying to find things in, like we psychoanalysts do as well. So I think it's a very complex way that I find it more simple to describe that way, in which our world is built or constructed, you know, from the very beginning of life until we die, because we cannot separate our own internal world from the internal world of our objects, and this is a constant, you know, like current. I don't know how do you call it, no, when the ocean comes and goes, the waves, no? Okay, so and it's related to the moon or many things about gravity and all that, but it's there. So I think that makes for a more complex construction that goes on, you know, that goes on. And I think also that there was something else I wanted to say about the, well, maybe it will, yes, about what you said. It's not a regression. I think that you are right. But I think that you're right. I mean, I agree. It's not that you are right. But it's more like my image is like a Russian doll, you see? Is the simultaneity or simultaneous, you know, all the little dolls. The problem is that the only one you see and listen to is the one which is outside. So, but we don't know inside who takes, you know, who is the command, who's taking the command of the personality. So, and we don't know either when we see it from the outside which are the broken dolls inside. Something that a friend of mine, maybe she's listening, Gianna Williams, once told me and made me think about it. You know, it's not only the Russian doll. Sometimes some of these dolls may be broken inside. And this is, I think, what you were saying, Christine, about this regression. No, well, I wouldn't. One of the things I would like to take is about the technology, because I think that could take us also to discuss something that we were thinking about discussing, which is adolescence and in our times, and the infantile and adolescent. Because I think that Christine used the word avatar, if I am not mistaken. Was it avatar, you said, or I misunderstood? Well, it was in my mind. It was in my mind, avatar, because, you know, adolescents, they have an avatar. They have an image on the internet that represents them. And so yesterday I went to try and find out where this word avatar came from. And it's the descent of the god into an incarnation, you see? So it's from, it's the Vishnu, for instance, in the Indian culture or religion. It has 10 incarnations in the world. And I thought it was very important, because I thought that this could be felt as if that avatar was the personality, or what if, as a different way of seeing and also making a diagnosis of how this avatar represents some part of the personality or the whole of it.
Can I try? Sorry. Can I try?
One more minute, Massimo.
Okay. Can I try to show the picture, the drawing?
Yes.
The drawing of for a clinical vignette, but only to suggest the problem that the problem of the casualty. This is a drawing of 11-year boys with a breakdown, with obsessional phobic breakdown. I think that is impossible to to deal to deal the impulse and of life, to deal the manage the important thing of life without this mental basic structure. I think that Balint define this this kind of absence at the basis of the spines, the basic fault. And so I think that the problem is not a regression, but a loss of experience that allows the natural growth, natural future growth. Thank you.
Thank you. For confidentiality reasons, maybe we will not go on in cases and drawings in details. Thank you very much for the discussion you started. I'm sure that you are going to have the possibility to continue during the questions that our participants send us, and there are already a lot of questions. So I'm starting with the first one. Freud suggested that one of the tasks of the infantile was to elaborate and give up psychic bisexuality. What do you believe about this idea in the light of gender fluid paradigm? In our days.
Oh, in our times.
In our times, yes, in our times.
I think it's a very interesting idea. To think in terms of never ending, not bisexuality, because we are, I would say, built with that, and we have different balances with that, but about never give up the possibility to actualize some feelings of representation of the self, but in the real body, you know, that is, it's different to be a masculine woman or a feminine man. Think about Winnicott, you know. It's different from changing the body for real, you know. This it's an issue. If it's coming from the infantile, we can think about that. It's not only about bisexuality. It's about something that cannot be done through symbolic processes. That can not be done with exchanges of representation and playing in the sense of moving from one representation to another one. It's about the real. So it's about being stuck, I would say, with a narcissistic wound that cannot be healed. So for me, it's about, so we have to talk with people who did that and did go well, because you know, so many adolescents had surgery and then they became with let's say depression or serious issues, but some are doing very well. So what about their sense of living in a body that had been transformed through their will, but also through a real intervention of a surgeon, which is about cutting pieces of the body for real. You know, it's not castration here. It's something that has to do with, I would say, we are, let's say, it's something we have in common, certainly, never being able to mourn some part of our infantile, not so much omnipotence, but despair at never being omnipotent, actually.
Thank you. Somebody wants to say something more? I'm going on with the next question.
Going on.
Next. Okay. Following the Bayonian idea of the infantile and the adult linked through double arrows that Clara has brought up, is this entailing a new definition of psychic conflict as a conflict between the infantile and the adult? If so, could you please briefly draw any idea about the nature of adulthood in the child or the adult itself?
Well, it's also a very interesting question, no? If we have, I don't think that, you know, the infantile can be compared with the adulthood in a similar conceptual frame, I think, because adulthood would be more related, at least what I think now, maybe I can change if I think it over, but it is related more to something more developmental, you know, the conflict between the adult part of the personality and the infant, or in the infant or the child, or that, those kind of conflicts. I think that when we, at least how I understand the concept of the infantile, as Florence Guignard started talking about, I think it's different, you see. It's more related to the psychic way of the composition of the mind throughout any moment of our life. But here we can bring not only Bion, but also Meltzer in what he was describing as the horizontal splitting. No? When he described the horizontal splitting, different from the vertical splitting, which was between the good and bad aspects of the personality, and sometimes this good and bad linked or were assimilated to, for instance, good feminine, bad masculine, or whatever. No, it is. But the other one, which is the horizontal splitting, that splitting it's not divides, but it describes different ways of functioning of the personality. And the concern of the infantile part is mostly related to the body, the needs, and the wishes. You know, in a way, it would be more related to a more the values of a more paranoid schizoid position, no, in which the survival of the self is the most important. From the more mature point of view, more related to parenthood, I think that Christine took this into account as well, no, and that as she has experience with these parent and child clinics. I think that the part of the personality related to the adulthood and parental couple, as it were, it's more concerned with the well-being or the safety of the baby aspect, or the part, the other one, the concern for the other first, and then the concern for my own survival. So I don't think that I could compare both things, you know, as parts of a conflict. It's a different situation. I don't know. The other thing about Bion, I would like to say something very, very briefly, is about his basic assumption concept of the group, you know, that what links a group, it's not only the illusion or the Freud description of the masses, but something that is below, which is functioning all the time as well, attacking not the links that the work group tries to establish, you know, and the work group and the adult part of the personality are, you know, related.
Massimo or Christine would like to add something?
Yes, some brief point. In my perspective, I prefer to think that there is a conflict between aspect of the self, not between adult and infantile, but between aspect of the self. And in particularly, I think that is important, for example, to think about the issue that the ego, the central ego, could treat the self how he is treated by environment. This is, I think, is one kind of conflict that in my clinical practice is important. Not too much between adulthood, infantile, between from the structure of the ego and the original, authentic, true self.
Christina?
But perhaps we will move to different questions because it's important to hear the audience. Just to add, but we won't develop on that now, About the thing, this has to do also what we do in psychoanalysis, which is to try to develop a space, so I will go back, to the intermediate space. But because access to reality comes also from that possibility, I would say, to dream the reality, but then to move on to observe external reality. But at first it's a kind of sharing a space for dreaming, but then thinking, thinking, which is different from dreaming and playing.
A place where to think and dream, yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will go on. To all panelists, what are your thoughts of what seems to be the centrality of children in our Western society? It seems in some ways children are more at the center of society than in any other times, and at the same time it seems the discontent is greater. What parts of the infantile you think are being denied or overindulged of the infantile? What do you think their discontent manifests about the fate of the infantile?
Well, I can say something briefly, children are more complex than that. But yes, we observe that since the 80s, we are less and less Oedipal, we are more and more dealing with narcissistic issues. So parents for the past generations had put more and more narcissistic emphasis in their children. So you should give me a narcissistic satisfaction. So it's not the parents mirroring the child, it's the child mirroring the parents to give him or her a kind of, and then you see that in Instagram all the time. So that puts the child always on the brink of a false self organization, or with the feeling that not being fueled with something enough, I would say, in middle of libido, capability for thinking, but myself. It's always about playing with different mirrors all around. That makes children more easily depressed because, of course, dealing with narcissistic mirroring makes you never satisfied. But some children, this is the issue, with ego. Some children are hyper mature. Certainly they will be dealing in adolescence. We will see that, with difficulties, but then they can think about the situation and they develop beautiful creativity. So I think we have both, we have both sides. Depression, suicidal ideas, in children now it's the symptom, I would say, but also a kind of, now it's my turn to run the world.
I would like to read you something coming from Florence Guignard, since she was named several times and she was with us during our previous webinar. Many thanks and congratulations to all of you. I shall keep thinking a lot, namely about the necessity to distinguish hallucination from illusion. Transformation, beyond, is a key word to understand how we psychoanalysts can help a patient can start accepting and then enjoying reality, abandoning short causalities linked to hallucination for causality in motion linked to the discovery of real life, This seems to me to be particularly interesting in our times.
Well, hello, Florence. It's so nice to know that you are there. Nice to know that. I think that you have taken up this difference between illusion, hallucination, and the omnipotence and fantasy and imagination also in many different and interesting ways. But I would like to, in a way, go back to something that you say as well. I don't know, I don't know exactly if you said it now, but it is about this virtual encounter between the infantile of the analyst and the infantile of the child, as it were, in an analysis, or the patient in an analysis, no? Which you link sometimes with the possibility of blind spots, and which I have been thinking about as possibilities of hallucinated spots as well, you know, not only blind spots, but when you have a blind spot, you start seeing something there that wasn't there, but it's your own projection. So I think that this is quite interesting also between parents and children, because one of the things that I think happen as well between parents and children is this encounter between the infantile and of both sides, but which provokes a kind of blind hallucinated spot in the adult. Because I think that what we see, notice that it's not a privilege sometimes of the children, because the real needs of the children are not taken into account, but somehow the needs, the wishes, confused with needs as well, no? So what the child may feel as a need and the adult may feel as a need, may be also a wish, and a wish for the adult in projection in the child to satisfy and gratify its own or his or her own tyranny, you see. I think that what one sees now, it's not so much the listening to the child in a real way in which we can understand what the child needs. I think it's more a projection on the child of something that happens also and that has been described by Bion, I think, by this kind of confusion between the emotional satisfaction and the material satisfaction, you know, this split between the emotional and the material, and I think that's something that is happening in the child-parent relationship at the moment. No, well, that's all.
Okay, shall I go on? Yes, you don't want to add something. Considering that in recent times, Mother Earth has been failing by means of the pandemic to be a good enough mother to its children, all of us, as external reality becomes a bad, hostile, aggressive object. Should we be worried about the possible social and individual regressive movement towards a schizoparanoid infantile, lacking the possibility to progress towards a depressive position? If so, what implications of this should be, as psychoanalytical thinkers, be more focused on in our consulting rooms in the near future? So the last lines I'm reading again. So if so, what implication for this should we as psychoanalytical thinkers be more focused on in our consulting rooms in the near future?
May I say something? I think Earth is sometimes an environmental mother and sometimes an erotic mother. So the level of persecution is not the same. So let's say it's persecution when it's about libido, and it's more being deprived, being neglected than being attacked. You know, one option is more helplessness, and the other one is more hatred. And then you have religion here. You know, you add a god. It could be paternal, could be more primitive, and you are back to, I would say, all the destructiveness when the superego cannot function. Because here it's also a question of superego. You know, how do we behave? So we are prone to idealization and regression to persecution because it's comfortable. But to behave and to decide how to act and to be ethical, it's a big effort, and it's a group effort also that is always to be redone.
Thank you, Christine, because you are answering to a question I didn't read of a participant who was who would like to underline the absence of the father in our discussion. So you answered.
But yes, the problem, the absence of the father, I think, is one possible. The father, but not so much the real father, but also the father in the mind of the individuals is one of the problem of the uncontents of the children in the previous question, because I think that now there is a problem of less of to impossibility to set the limit to the children, to impossibility to set the limit, and the loss of the possibility to see the real subjectivity of the child. So I think that the position of the father is a position that could put the importance of the quality of the subjectivity of the child.
I would add something. You will say perhaps it's too theoretical, but I would like to go back to Freud. You know, the infantile, it's about originary fantasy, you know, phantasm. So the fantasy of the primal sin is a serious organizer for the infantile, and it's supposed to be there. But I would say is in the symbolic capabilities of the environment, of the parents, of the adults around the child. Also to talk in a way that there is always a third. It's not an omnipotent mother or an omnipotent father. Is people who are also dealing with the limitation of reality and managing themselves also, or not, on trying not to be in an imaginary world. So I would say it's being conveyed around the adults and their own infantile, being so seduced by their own infant could make them, like we see now, and I agree with Massimo, you know, with a big difficulty to assume that position of, I use the word superego, but you know what I mean, limitations, boundaries, but also not just for the pleasure of the, so give me a break, I want to sleep now. It's about, those are the rules. You know, those are the rules. Everybody is submitted to the same rules. So yes, the father, in the sense of the archaic father, it's devouring his children. Remember Zeus is the one who escaped that. But I would say the symbolic father is conveyed by any adult of any gender.
I will try to address another question. I have wondered if the vast increase in communication on social media has resulted in a regression of ordinary conversation from the previous more formal speech and language to now the more familiar, personal, full of extreme accusations and exaggerations that are later refined by well-meaning people in a family. Now everyone is treated like family. No more please and thank you. Simply thereof and tumble on the infantile, who is obvious to the effect on the other. In Lacanian terms, this is expressed as the fall of the symbolic and the great increase of the imaginary in social discourse. Does this enhance Clara's point? Do you want me to read it again? It's a very complicated question.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you can give us the
idea. The idea is the passage from the previous way of everyday talking and discussion to a new language where everybody becomes very rough and very aggressive. And the person, our colleague who asked this question, refers to the Lacanian theory and that pretends that this is the result of the fall of the symbolic. You were talking about symbolic deficit, symbolic, and related to an increase of the imaginary. So this is the imaginary discourse versus symbolic. And I think that has something to do with your proposition of the symbolic deficit resulting from the new communications, virtual communications.
Well, well, it's not that I think that it's a result, cause and effect. I don't think so. I think that it's the use of I mean, today we are using social communication, technology, and we are communicating in a way that we wouldn't be allowed to, not even in the pandemics. I'm not talking about that. We wouldn't be able to communicate if we didn't have this opportunities of that technology provides us. So it's not the fact that technology or the social media or whatever exists. It's that the use we make of it, in a way, if we put it or not in the place of the ideal, or if we use it as a tool, you know. I think that it is very, we have to observe, you know, we have to observe, we have to listen more, because sometimes we look at what's happening in a way that it's judgmental in some ways, you know. And I don't know if the changes in the upbringing of the children have to do, you know, with the limitations or the acceptance of frustration or limitations or not being able to put limits. This is not only in children, this is the whole society that is going towards that direction, no? And we have to see, unfortunately, we cannot foresee the future. The only thing we can do is somehow to have this globe, no, that we can use for the past, and we cannot even know the past. We know that there are things that are being constructed from reality and fantasy, from the other and oneself, you know. It's a very complex world, and I don't think that, I think that we should be very careful about the judging what's going on. I think that we have to observe a little bit more, because society, culture, many things change. Others that remain, no, like in a transformation, in a catastrophic change, but not always a catastrophe.
I would like to
is
add, oh, sorry. No, I would like, it's too late. I would like to add
Go
just
on.
one word about dogmatism that is all over the world. It's also in psychoanalytic institutes. And we have to be careful ourselves about that. You know, we don't have, I would say, a space, a playful area when we could talk as if we talk directly, you know, you're bad, this is true, this is wrong. And we don't play as if, we don't use metaphors enough. And I think us psychoanalysts, we talk about that, but we have to practice also with our colleagues.
I'm so sorry to remind us that our illusion we never renounce, but it's time to stop for today. There are a lot of questions, and I think that participants will contact you per email to have answers, because there are a lot of interesting questions more. I would like to thank you very much for this crucial for our days for psychoanalysis discussion, and this subject that we will have the possibility to continue in with next webinars, but also during the IPA Congress in July. The next, I think, upcoming webinar, it will be the 26th February, and will be about creative projects in psychoanalysis with Virginia Ungar, Katarina Frost, Elora Ravioli, and it will be Vivienne Elton who will be the moderator. Thank you very much, and see you very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.